Imagine an island where 1 in every 10 people has never seen the colour of the sea, where the brightest days are the hardest days to see, where children are born into a world of light and shadow with no red and no green, and where a single word, maskun, not see, describes something almost every family lives with. Now imagine that all of it traces back to one night in 1775, when a typhoon left 20 people alive on a ring of coral, and one of them carried, without knowing it, the gene that would be written into the eyes of their descendants for 2.5 centuries. This is Pingelap, Federated States of Micronesia. About 250 people on 1.8 square kilometres of coral, 3,000 kilometres from anywhere most people have heard of. Almost 1 in 10 of them sees no colour at all, and roughly 3 in 10 carry the gene without knowing it. The scientists have a name for it: complete achromatopsia. The islanders had a name for it first. So how does one storm end up deciding in 2026 what a child's eyes can do? And how do you build a life on an equatorial island under some of the harshest sunlight on Earth, when your eyes were made for the dark? Spread a map of the Pacific and look for the place where the ocean is emptiest. East of the Philippines, north of Papua, south of Guam, the Federated States of Micronesia stretch across more than 2,500 kilometres of sea in 4 states: Yap, Chuuk, Pohnpei, and Kosrae. The country is enormous in water and tiny in land. Pingelap belongs to Pohnpei State, and it is one of the outer islands, a place you reach by small plane or by ship, not by road. The atoll itself is a classic of its kind. 3 islets, the main one, Pingelap, and 2 smaller ones, sit on a coral reef around a central lagoon. Total land, about 1.8 square kilometres. Total height above the sea, a few metres and no more. Coconut palms, breadfruit, taro pits dug down to the fresh water lens beneath the coral, and a village along the lagoon shore where the boats are pulled up. There is an airstrip. Small aircraft connect the atoll with Pohnpei, the state capital island a few hundred kilometres to the west. The schedule depends on the airline, the weather, and the season. Between flights, the atoll is what atolls have always been, a world complete in itself, with the ocean on every side. The climate is equatorial. Hot, humid, brilliant. On a clear day the light bounces off white coral sand and off the lagoon and off the sea until the whole world seems to be made of glare. For most people, this is paradise. For a person with achromatopsia, whose eyes contain no working cones, only the rods that are meant for dusk and darkness, that same brilliance is a wall of white. Everything washes out, detail disappears, the eyes ache, which is the first paradox of Pingelap. It is one of the most beautiful places on Earth to look at, and it is home to a community for whom looking is the hardest thing there is. The Federated States of Micronesia is itself a young and unusual country. It became self-governing in 1979 and fully sovereign in 1986 under a compact of free association with the United States, an arrangement that lets its citizens live and work in America without a visa, uses the US dollar as its currency, and puts its defence in Washington's hands. Some 600 islands, a national population of roughly 100,000, and a capital Palikir on Pohnpei. Pingelap is one of the smallest pieces of that mosaic, and one of the farthest from its centre. To understand why, you have to go back to the storm. Around the year 1775, a typhoon crossed Pingelap. Oral history and modern research agree on the essentials. The storm and the famine that followed it killed most of the atoll's population. When it was over, roughly 20 people were left alive. 20 people is not a community. It is a bottleneck. And among the survivors was the island's ruler, a man remembered as Micronesia, who carried, without knowing it, a recessive gene for complete colour blindness. Under normal circumstances, a rare recessive gene stays rare, 2 carriers must meet, and their child must inherit both copies, for the condition to appear. But on an island of 20 survivors, everyone descends from everyone. Cousins marry cousins because there is no one else. And a gene that should have vanished became, over generations, one of the most common inheritances on the atoll. In the year 2000, a team of geneticists published the molecular explanation, the Pingelap's Achromatopsia traces to a single mutation in a gene called CNGB3, which builds a protein the cone cells of the retina need in order to work. Everyone on the island who has the condition carries 2 copies of the same fault, inherited down separate lines from the same survivor. It was one of the first cases in which a founder story told for 2 centuries in a village was confirmed base pair by base pair in a laboratory. Geneticists call this the founder effect. On Pingelap it has a face and a name and a date. The centuries after the storm brought the outside world in waves. Spain claimed the Caroline Islands and sold them to Germany in 1899. Japan took them in 1914 and held them through the Second World War. The United States administered them afterward as a trust territory until Micronesia negotiated its own independence. Each empire left something: a church, a language of administration, a set of records, and each barely touched the reef where a small people had been quietly rebuilding itself since 1775. By the time the outside world took notice, in the 20th century, the numbers were unlike anywhere else. In most human populations, complete achromatopsia affects perhaps 1 person in 30,000. On Pingelap, it affects close to 1 in 10, and about 30% of the population are carriers. In the 1990s, the neurologist Oliver Sacks travelled to the atoll and to the Pingelapese community on Pohnpei. And in 1997 he published what he found under a title that has followed the island ever since: The Island of the Colorblind. Pingelap had of course understood its own condition long before the book. The Pingelapese word is maskun, literally, not see. It is not a diagnosis. It is a description of a way of living that the community had already built around its affected members: who fishes when, who weaves what, who works in the shade, and who works in the sun. That is the second paradox. The outside world arrived with the vocabulary of disease. The island had already arrived at the vocabulary of adaptation. 250 people. 1 main village, a church, a school, the airstrip, taro pits, canoe houses, and the reef. That is the physical inventory of Pingelap, and it is enough. Life runs on the sea and the soil. Men fish the reef and the lagoon, spearing, netting, line fishing from small boats, and the catch is shared through families rather than sold. Taro is grown in pits dug down to the freshwater lens beneath the coral. Breadfruit and coconut do the rest. Money exists, remittances from relatives on Pohnpei and in the United States, occasional wages from the school or the local government. But the atoll's real economy is the tide table. Into that rhythm, maskun introduces its own schedule. A person with complete achromatopsia sees the world in shades of grey. But the more important fact is that they see it best when the light is low. Bright sun does not just wash out colour, it overwhelms the rods entirely, and the world dissolves into glare. So on Pingelap, the affected have long done what makes sense. They work in the shade, they wear dark glasses when they can get them, and they come into their own at dusk and at night. Night fishing is the classic example, and it has become part of the island's story. Men who struggle at noon reading the shallows with ease under moonlight, seeing the movement of fish that a colour-sighted eye would miss. Whether that is a genuine advantage or a compensation the community is organised around, the effect is the same. A role, a use, a place. Children with maskun go to the same school as everyone else, and the community has learned what helps: shade, seating away from windows, patience with squinting, and the understanding that a child who reads slowly in the glare of a classroom may read perfectly well in the evening. Fine pattern work, weaving, mat making is often described as something the achromats do especially well, because texture and contrast are exactly what their eyes are built to detect. And then there is the outward flow. Like every outer island in Micronesia, Pingelap has been sending its people away for generations. To Pohnpei, where a Pingelapese community lives in its own settlement. To Guam, to Hawaii and the US mainland, under the Compact of Free Association that lets citizens of the Federated States of Micronesia live and work in the United States. The gene travels with them. There are more Pingelapese and more Pingelapese achromats off the atoll than on it. The atoll's 3 islets, the main island and its 2 smaller companions across the lagoon, hold everything the community has: the village, the taro pits, the coconut and breadfruit groves, the airstrip and the church. In the 1990s, when the neurologist Oliver Sacks came, he travelled with a Norwegian scientist named Knut Nordby, who was himself an achromat, a man who had spent his life squinting through the same glare, and Nordby's account of walking onto an island where his condition was ordinary is one of the most moving passages in the book that followed. Supplies come the way they come to every outer island, by the field trip ship that circles the state's atolls on a schedule measured in weeks, and by the small plane when it flies. Rice, flour, sugar, fuel and the parts for the outboard motors arrive together and are shared out. Between arrivals, the reef and the taro pits provide. Nobody on Pingelap is rich in money. Almost nobody is hungry. The school is small and the church is central, and both are the places where the community's arrangements are most visible, where a child who squints at the board is moved to the shaded side of the room without discussion, and where the pews fill in the cool of the evening service as easily as the morning one. Which leaves the atoll itself as the keeper of the story. 250 people, 3 islets, 1 lagoon, and a condition that has stopped being an anomaly here and become simply part of what a family is. The language of the atoll is Pingelapese, one of the Micronesian tongues, spoken by the few hundred people on the island and by the larger diaspora on Pohnpei and beyond. It is a language with its own words for the reef, the winds, the phases of the moon that govern fishing, and its own word for a way of seeing. Maskun is not spoken as an insult. It is closer to a fact of birth, like being left-handed. In a community where nearly every family has an affected member, there is no them. There is only the question of who does what, and when. Feasts, church services, funerals, the endless communal work of an atoll, the achromats are in all of it, at the times of day when they can be. Religion here, as across Micronesia, is Christian and central. The church is the largest building, and the week is organised around it. Sundays are for rest and gathering. Feasts mark the calendar. And feasting on an atoll is a very specific art, pig, breadfruit, taro, fish and coconut in every form, prepared in the earth oven and shared out by household in an order everyone understands. Above all, the atoll's culture is one of obligation. Everyone owes everyone. On an island of 250, that is not sentiment, it is engineering. It is what allowed 20 survivors to become a people again after 1775. And it is what allows a community with a rare genetic condition to treat it not as a tragedy, but as a fact to be organised around. Visitors come occasionally, scientists, journalists, the odd traveller who has read the book. They tend to arrive expecting an island of tragedy and leave describing an island of arrangements. This person fishes at night, that person weaves in the shade, this child sits by the door. The colour is missing. Almost nothing else is. On Pohnpei, the Pingelapese who moved to the main island have kept their own settlement, their own language, and their own share of the gene, a second Pingelap, a few hours by boat from the first, where the same word is spoken and the same arrangements are made. It is one of the reasons the story of the atoll reached the outside world at all. The community was large enough and organised enough to be seen. Yet the atoll's future is not decided by its people alone. Pingelap is a low coral atoll, and low coral atolls are the front line of the changing sea. A few metres of elevation, a freshwater lens beneath the coral that a single storm surge can salt, taro pits that die when the salt reaches them, shorelines that move. Everything that made the atoll habitable for 1,000 years depends on a balance between rain, reef, and ocean that is no longer as steady as it was. Walk the lagoon shore at midday, and the atoll shows you what it asks of its people. White sand that throws the sun back into your face. Water so clear the shadows of fish move across the bottom like birds across a field, palms clattering in the trade wind. And, under the trees, the shade, deep, green, deliberate, where the acromats of Pingelap have always done their daytime work, mending nets, weaving pandanus, sorting the morning's catch by feel and by contrast rather than by colour. The island's beauty is a fact, so is its glare. On Pingelap, the two are the same thing seen by different eyes. The reef is the island's shield and its pantry. It breaks the swell, it grows the fish, and it builds the sand. When the water warms and the coral bleaches, all three functions weaken at once. And there is the light itself, the atoll's glory and its burden. Sunrise over the lagoon. Noon like a hammer. The long, gold, forgiving hour before dusk when the whole village seems to exhale and the acromats come outdoors. On Pingelap, more than almost anywhere, the day is divided not by the clock, but by how much light a human eye can bear. For the outside visitor it is a place of overwhelming beauty. For a tenth of the people who live here, beauty is something felt more than seen, the warmth of the sand, the sound of the reef, the pattern of a mat under the fingers. The atoll's animals are the animals of every Pacific reef, the fish that feed the village, the seabirds that nest on the outer islets, the coconut crabs, the turtles that come ashore in season. Its plants are the plants that made atoll life possible at all. Coconut, breadfruit, pandanus, taro, each one a technology as much as a crop, each one at the mercy of salt. Nothing on Pingelap is decorative. Everything is either food, shelter, medicine or shade. The threats to Pingelap are the threats to every small atoll, sharpened, distance, one airstrip, one airline, one supply line by sea. Emigration. The young leave for school and work, and most do not come back to live. Water, a fresh water, lends the size of a village, at the mercy of drought and storm. Sea level, measured in centimetres, meaningful in metres, and the atoll has few metres to spare. And, unusually, a medical question. Achromatopsia has become one of the conditions that gene therapy researchers study most closely, precisely because it is caused by a single, well-mapped genetic fault. Trials in other parts of the world have restored partial function in some patients. What that would mean for Pingelap, whether the atoll's most famous inheritance is a condition to be cured or a difference to be lived with, and who decides is a conversation the community, not the visitors, will have. Under the compact, the flow runs both ways. Money comes back, remittances that buy outboard motors, roofing iron, school fees on Pompeii. So do people, at least for a while, a nurse who trained in Hawaii and returns for a year, a teacher, a grandmother coming home to die on the atoll where she was born. The distance from Pingelap to the American mainland is measured in 11-hour flights, and in the accumulated absences of a small village. But the road home is never entirely closed, and the word for the island's oldest inheritance travels the whole route without being translated. The Pingelapese who left carry the story with them, and sometimes carry it back. Doctors, teachers, students who return for a season, for a funeral, for a feast. The diaspora is larger than the island. That is loss, and it is also insurance. A people spread across the Pacific and the United States is harder to erase than 250 on a reef. Under the Compact of Free Association, Micronesians can move to Guam, Hawaii, or the American mainland freely, and tens of thousands have. It is a lifeline and a drain in the same motion. Every year the atoll's schools graduate children who will do their best work somewhere else. Every year the diaspora sends money home and asks its parents to follow. A community that survived a typhoon with 20 people is now negotiating a slower kind of thinning. But the atoll is where the word was born. Maskun means not see. It was coined by people who saw their situation with perfect clarity. Come back to the lagoon at dusk. The glare is gone. The water is grey and silver, the palms are black against the sky. And along the shore the village is moving again, boats going out, children on the sand, an old man mending a net by feel. This is the hour Pingelap was made for. 2.5 centuries ago a storm reduced this atoll to 20 people, and one of them carried something invisible in his blood. Everything since, the marriages, the births, the word maskun, the night fishing, the shade, has been the island's answer to that inheritance, not a cure, an arrangement. A community deciding that a difference in 1 in 10 is not a division, but a schedule. Pingelap is not just an atoll with a rare condition, it is a reminder that a single day can echo for 250 years, and that the measure of a people is not what the storm left them with, but what they built around it.